Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of A.V.Astronomy, and tonight's video I wanted to go over my basic workflow. This is not going to be an exhaustive lesson, as there are some different approaches you will take with different images. You know, some images you'll be working with will have a much higher dynamic range than others. But I'm going to use M42 as an example, since it is a higher dynamic range target, and the principles that I use here will apply to many other images. So first thing you want to do, you've taken your data, right? You've taken your light frames, you've taken at least some flat files and bias files. Now, I know a lot of people are big on doing dark files, doing darks. I personally don't, just because mainly I don't know how accurate they're going to be anyway with the temperature difference with a DSLR and not having a cooled camera. So I leave those out, and really with modern day digital SLRs, the dark current is so low anyway, I don't think it is a huge deal breaker when it comes to overall image quality. If you're doing dithering like you should be, and taking multiple frames, you know, 40, 50 frames or so, 60 frames, you're going to get some relatively clean, pretty nice and clean images. So let's get started. First thing we're going to do is open up Deep Sky Stacker. If you have not downloaded this, it is a free stacking software for your images. There are some others that you can use. PixInsight has one built into it, and I know there's some others out there, but this has been working great for me, so this is what I'm using. Go to Open Picture Files and navigate to the folder that you're wanting to stack, right? So I have, this is how I label my file system. I do bias, edited, flats, stacked, and raw. So we go to raw, light frames, so we select all the light frames, okay, and you want to check all, then get your flat files, Control A, selects all, and then of course hit Control to deselect, and click to deselect the ones that you don't need there. You want to do at least 20 flats. That's what I go. More is better, but I do 20 flats. And then bias. Same thing, select all. And you've got these all checked. The next thing you want to do under settings, your register settings, you want to play with this slider to make sure it can detect a fair amount of stars. I go for 100 to 200. That usually works pretty well. So you can play around with that to get the star threshold that works for you. Wouldn't overthink this program too much. It really is pretty straightforward. Light frames, flat files, and bias frames. Okay. Now you want to go to Register Check Pictures. Now I do under settings here. Hold on. Sorry. Stacking parameters. Standard mode. Kappa Sigma clipping. Now, what that does is, in the event you had a meteor or a satellite or any other plane, whatever, anything that just flew across your imaging frame, that will cancel it out. It's a really good feature to initiate, to use. Okay. Flats, I do average, bias, average, alignment, automatic. All this other stuff, honestly, I've just left alone. I don't touch it. You do want to create output file in the folder for the reference frame, autosave TIFF, and use all available processors. These should be on by default, but that's what you want. So you hit OK. Under Advanced, this is here. You can check. You hit Compute, and you can check to see how many stars it detects in the image. And yeah, what we got, 200 something. That's plenty of stars to make sure this is aligning properly. Register already registered, and then hit OK. I've already stacked this, so I'm not going to go through it, but with this many images, it's going to take about 5-10 minutes, depending on how fast your computer is, to get this all stacked. Okay, so you hit OK. All right, after your image has stacked, you're going to get some result right here. Okay, it's going to display right here. And once you get this, once this is fully loaded on, you want to go to Save Picture to File, label it, choose where you want it to save, right? And don't, make sure none is clicked for compression. And this right here, embed adjustments in the saved image, but do not apply them. That's very important. Do not click this. You want it to be embedded into the image, okay? And then you click Save. Now you've got an image to work with in Photoshop. Photoshop is the program I use. Again, there are a fair amount of options for editing your photos. I like Photoshop because it's what I'm used to, and it's produced some really good results. There are some other softwares like PixInsight, Astro Pixel Processor, GIMP. There's some other ones out there as well, but anyway, this is what I use, and it's served me well. So we want to open up, go to that stacked image, okay, and here it is. Well, that's the short stack. Here it is. So this is what your stacked image is going to look like coming out of Deep Sky Stacker. It doesn't look like much of anything. So first thing I do is duplicate the frame. Control J is the shortcut for that. And I do an initial stretch. So I go over here to Action, and we're going to go to Curves and just do a nice stretch on this image. And you want to keep that line from hitting the ceiling, the top here. So this might be a little too aggressive for the first stretch. Let's pull this down just a tad. There we go. We'll go with something like that. Okay, that's the first stretch. Then flatten. Another thing, this image is, because I did Drizzle on it, is huge. It's like 500 megabytes. So that's something to keep in mind. I usually go ahead and just change the image size. Take this bad boy down to like a 20 by 13 at 300 DPI, and that brings it down to a 137 megabyte file instead of the 500 and something. So something to keep in mind, if you use Drizzle, it's going to make the file much larger because it's interpolating the data to try and enhance resolution. Do the same thing. Let's get another stretch out of this. So duplicate layer, Control J, hit the curves, and let's drag from the center up again. You can see starting the nebulosity starting to come through. Same thing, and don't worry about the core right now. You're going to blow the heck out of this core while we're stretching. We'll recover that later when we're doing the short frames, those 15-second frames that I took. Right now we're just trying to squeeze out as much nebulosity and interstellar dust and detail that we can right here. Layer, flatten. Now you can use a star mask to keep these stars from bloating. I have not quite mastered that yet, the settings on that. I do use them sometimes, and in some images I can get away with one iteration. Usually if I do more than one iteration of the star mask with a star mask stretch, the stars themselves get these dark halos around them, and they can be very difficult to remove. So I'm sure it's just a matter of setting tweaking to minimize that, but I have found just letting the stars kind of do their thing has not been so bad. I have a different technique we'll incorporate here in a moment, using the minimize option to minimize those stars. All right, so now that we've done two stretches here, it looks like we could get away with one more. So let's flatten this out. Control J, stretch. All right, that's obviously way too crazy, but we're going to go to about right here, okay? Let's pull this down some. I'm pretty satisfied with that. We're getting some decent nebulosity detail. The core is blown out, but there's still a good amount of detail here, and you're starting to see some of the dust lanes and interstellar dust outside of it. To stretch to this degree, you really got to have, I would say at least 30 to 40. The more the merrier. The cleaner your image is going to be. Dithered frames. And if you're not sure what dithering is, I could do a whole lesson on that, but essentially what it is it's slightly changing the composition of your image while imaging. So what I mean by that is, after in your APT capture software will do this for you, is after it takes an image, it slightly moves its angle of view of the current target, and by doing so, the color noise that is produced becomes random, and therefore it is averaged out, and it cleans up the images beautifully. It really does a good job. So the more images you can do dithered, the better. Now that we've done this, let's go ahead and flatten it, and you see this, some of this light pollution that I'm dealing with, and I've used a CLS, Skytech CLS filter with this. There's still some light pollution that bleeds through, and there's several techniques out there for removing it, the light pollution. The easiest and one of the, I think, most effective ways I have found of doing this is by duplicating the layer, going to the dropper over here, and sampling the area that appears to, it's more of this greenish here, right? Let's pull this out. I do a 5x5 or 11x11 average. You want to get an average of the area. Boom, right there. Okay. Hold down Alt backspace, and it makes a solid gradient of that color you just sampled. Then you're going to click on the image here under the Layers tab to make sure that's active. Go to Image, Apply Image, and you're going to go to Subtract. And I do an offset of 30. You can change this 25, 30, 35, 40 to your liking. You'll see it change down here. It may make it a little grayer or darker. I think 30's kind of been a good sweet spot for the offset. So that's what I go with. And then I just delete this. That's gone. Now look at that. Your light pollution's been pulled out, and there's really not a whole lot of gradient issue going on here. I'm going to do a Control J, do another layer. You always want to work in layers. That way, if you screw something up, you can delete the layer that you screwed up, and you still got the image that doesn't have any tweaks done to it that you may have messed up. But anyway, so what we're going to do now is gradient reduction. I'm going to go into RC Astro. This is a plugin. This is on Russell Croman's site, and it is an excellent plugin. It works 90% of the time, and there's different levels of it that you can use. But you go you can go to Fine Detail, Medium, Coarse, and these are your aggressiveness tabs. I usually just stick with medium, and balance the background, and let it run its thing. And boom. Now on this particular one, I don't really like this little halo thing that it did on here. So first of all, let's undo that. And what you can do as well is selectively choose, using a lasso, where you want the gradient reduction to take place. So let's say you just want it to do everything but. And let's feather this, I don't know, 20, 30 pixels. Select inverse because we want it to just perform that gradient reduction on the everything but that nebula. And let's see what happens here. We'll go with medium again and see what happens. Now you notice here, it was a much better result. It left the nebula itself alone, but it did a great job of reducing those gradients. There was a good bit more than I thought. Neutralized all that gradient out of there. All right, so now we're going to flatten this. And at this point, what I would do is start working on blending in the core. So that's going to be our next step here. Another thing I wanted to mention, in this type of situation where you're going to be blending multiple images together, you don't want to make any crops or adjustments. It's okay to change this as long as this is activated, because it'll automatically adjust that to be proportionate, okay? But you don't want to actually come in here with the crop tool and crop out certain sections. It'll never line up properly. Trust me, I've been there, done that. It doesn't work. So for the time being, we're going to leave this like this, and now we're going to open up the other image, which is the short stack, okay? This is the stack of 15-second images, okay, and I think I did 30 of these that were stacked with the same flat and bias frames. And just a quick note on that, if you're not sure what a flat and bias frame is, again, that's probably a whole nother video lesson on how to take those, but essentially a flat frame is kind of a grayish looking image that helps with vignetting, and the bias frames help with artifacts and noise as well. You take the bias frames by putting the lens cap on your camera and setting it to the fastest shutter speed it can, and take you 20, 30, 40 frames. The idea is to get them as black as possible, and you do this at the same ISO that you used when you imaged your target. Same thing with the flats, although in this case what you'll do is most people put a white t-shirt, and that's what I do too. Aim it at a clear part of the sky, and you're going for something about in the middle of the histogram, maybe a little on the darker side. That's worked well for me. And take about 20 or 30 of those. Okay, that's in a little. That's just a little tidbit on that in a nutshell. But really, there's more to it. Okay, so just like with the other one, we're going to duplicate our layer, Control J, and we're going to stretch this bad boy. Boom. And the first couple stretches are not going to look like much of anything because this was a really short exposure. But the idea here is we're just trying to bring out the core. Okay. So let's flatten that. That looks good to me. Control plus to zoom in so you can get a closer look to make sure you're not blowing this core out as you start to stretch this. So Control J, we're gonna give it another go. Hit adjustments, curves, and let's swing that up. So we don't want to go that high. We don't want to lose that detail in the middle. Let's just go right about there. Let's bring that down. Preserve some of that. Okay, that's looking pretty good there. Let's flatten that. Control J again. I think we can get away with one more stretch here, guys. Curves. And that's a bit much. We're losing the core. We want to retain that core detail. I'm going to bring this back a bit. See that? There we go. Right about there. That's good. Okay, this is what we're going to work with. So let's flatten this. Layer, flatten, Control minus. Let's zoom out here. Okay. And let's make this respective to the size of the other image. 20. Same thing here. 300 pixels. Boom. Now it's the exact same size. Alright, if you notice, the orientation of this and this is not the same. So we need to fix that. So we got to flip this horizontally and vertically. Where was it? Rotation. Vertical. Okay. Now we're good. Alright, so here's where the magic happens. We're going to copy this image, paste it on this image, make a layer mask, and then paste this back on top. I'm going to show you that step by step here. Okay. So first thing we're going to do is press Control A on your dark image. Okay. Then Control C to copy it. And you're going to click on this to activate this layers panel, and you're going to paste that right on top. Control V. Okay. It puts it right on top. Now we can just kind of move this aside. Now what you want to check for is that it pasted it exactly where it needs to be. And the way you check for that is you go into opacity and lower it. Maybe not that much. Enough to, oh, okay, you can see it now. Look at that. See, it's not perfectly lined up. So use your arrow keys. Oop. To make adjustments to get these aligned properly, because if they're not aligned right, then you're going to lose resolution. Okay, it's going to soften your image and it's not going to look right. You can check again right there. That's right about there. Actually, that's some good reference stars right here. Yep, right. Boom. Okay. That's pretty well centered. Alright, so let's put that back to 100%. Now that those are aligned pretty well, what we're going to do now is create a layer mask by pressing this tab right here, this little button here. Okay. Press Control A, Control C, Alt click, Control V, and there it is. Okay, there's your mask. Now, when you see it combined like this, obviously that's not what you're going for. So you've got to make some adjustments here. And you do that, you adjust the mask. You can press deselect here, get that away. Marching ants. You go to blur. You're going to use Gaussian blur, okay, to soften this mask. Okay, and you're going to adjust this again, zoom in. But you're going to adjust this to your liking. You know, obviously that looks pretty horrible, so we want to just preserve the core. We don't want it too soft. Just enough to bring that core back, right? So play around with the slider, see what looks good to your eyes. That looks pretty good to me there. So I'm going to go with 101 pixels on that. Now, another thing you can do to help bring back some of that detail is do a curves layer on this. So press Control M to bring up curves and drag the slider on the bottom here down. See what that does? Now you want to be careful here. You don't want to do it that much, but you can bring back some of that detail you lose right about there. Looks pretty good to me. Okay? We're going to hit OK. Now we're going to flatten all this. And now you can crop all this awfulness. Now you'll notice here on this particular image I did not use a focal reducer, and if you've ever wondered what happens when you don't use a focal reducer on a telescope that doesn't have a perfectly flat field, this is what you get. This like warp speed field curvature here, and it's pretty severe. You can see, I mean, it's pretty wide. Now we can mitigate some of this in Camera Raw Filter, which I'm going to do right now. We're going to go into Camera Raw Filter, okay, under Filter tab, Camera Raw. Oh, I'm breaking my own rule here. Hold on, let's back that up. Control J, let's copy that layer. All right. Camera Raw Filter. And we are going to go to the Lens Correction tab, and we're going to go to Distortion. Okay, and what we're going to do is, see, if you go this way, it makes it even worse. But if you go the opposite way, it actually, I know it looks kind of weird in the middle, but it's correcting a lot of those stretched stars on the outer edge. Now you don't want to go too far with it. Obviously you get a kind of a weird effect there, but you want to keep the stars. That looks about right there. We're going to have to crop some of that out, but that does help a good bit on the field curvature there. So I'm going to go with that. Okay. Before and after. See how that fixes that? We're going to flatten that. And now we're going to crop out the garbage. Or the areas that just don't look all that great. Okay? Which includes all these oval-shaped stars. And that looks pretty good right there. Now, you got all these, in this particular image, Orion is not a super busy, as in like superstar busy picture. So there's not a whole lot of adjustments you need to make here, but we're going to do a minimum pass on this thing. So we're going to Control J, copy the layer. All right, we're going to go into Select, Color Range, and we're going to go to Highlights because we're wanting to just dim these guys down, right? And we're going to adjust this slider so that we get most of the stars selected. We want a good bit, you know. That's probably good right about there, and we don't want too much nebulosity, but at the same time you don't want to lose out on those stars, so let's say right about there. Okay, now you notice it's selected some of the nebula. We don't want it to mess with that, so what you do is just go to your elliptical tool, and you're gonna you can zoom in, and you're gonna, actually I use the you're gonna go to your polygonal lasso. That's what I use. Some people use others, and you're going to hold alternate while you click around the areas that you don't want it to cover. See that? And it deletes it. So same thing. We want it to keep it around that. Okay. And we're getting a little better here. Okay. You get the idea. Yeah, let's leave this little alone here too. We can always reselect stars. But you really do want to take the time. It doesn't take long to deselect the nebulosity. You don't want to mess with that with the minimum filter. You can even go in here. But you get the idea. So you want to make these a little more refined. This selection more refined. There, and that's leaving the nebula alone. All right. You want to go to Select. In this next step, you want to go to Select, Modify, Expand. And I usually do with something like this about 2 pixels, but you're going to probably want to experiment, again, to your liking. But what this does is this expands the selection that you already have here, okay? So we're going to expand that. And if it picks up nebulosity, remember, you don't want it to do that. So let's get rid of this. Okay. I think we're good here. A little bit in the Running Man got messed with, got selected. We really don't need all those. They're so small as it is. Okay. Let's run with that. And select, modify, feather. And you should do half the amount that you expand. At least that's what I do. Works for me. And let me just say, this is not a, I'm not touting this as the absolute best way to process images. I'm still learning as well, but from what I've learned, reading online, Cloudy Night forums, YouTube videos, and books that I've read, these are a lot of the techniques that are used in Photoshop. All right. So just to recap there, I went to Modify, Feather, and selected one and hit OK. All right, so now what we want to do is minimize these stars. Here's the fun part. Filter, Other, Minimum. And you really want to do a small selection here, but you can get a preview of what it does. Now, I might do, and you want this to be on Preserve Roundness, because you want your stars to remain round. But let's put 2 pixels on here and see what happens. Look at that. Look at that. Let's zoom in a little bit. See what happens to these stars? Those really tiny ones just pretty much disappear, and the larger ones shrink down just ever so slightly, but enough to, and this is all to taste, guys. Really, you're trying to, if you're really just trying to emphasize the nebula, that's where this really comes in handy. I don't think I'd go even that heavy. I like the stars in this particular picture because it's not too star heavy anyway. So I'd probably do just like a 1 pixel on this. Hit OK, deselect, and there you go. Here's a before and after. Look at that. Before, after. Now these really big ones, if this bothers you, let's flatten this first. Control J. If these bigger stars bother you, you can shrink them individually as well. And one of the ways I do that, first thing you actually want to do is make your selection. And I use the elliptical tool here for this. Zoom in, Control plus, make your selection. Like, let's just shrink this guy down. He's just a little too big, right? Let's get it centered right about there. Filter, distort, spherize, and watch what happens here when we drag this slider down. Now, if you go all the way down with it, you kind of get this weird halo, but, from here to right about there is good. And look at that. It just chops it down. And you can do that with multiple stars here. And here's a before and after. See that? Now, this image, the signalness came through so well. I haven't even done a color saturation on this yet, adjustment, as you've seen. I would probably just go, again, that's to taste. But for me, I would just make a mild adjustment. And the way I do this is I go into, press Control U to bring up the hue saturation. Just on this particular one, we're talking maybe 10, 15. I don't want to go too heavy here. Let's just go 10. Let's go 10. Okay, change your mode to color, filter, blur, Gaussian blur, 2 pixels, and hit OK. Alright, and then you're going to click the background layer. So what you want to do here is bring up the curves adjustment, and you want the output to be 255. Yeah. On the input and the output 245. Okay. And then you want to click right in the middle. Boom. And make sure that these read 128, 128. Oop. And there you go. That's how you make a color adjustment without adding noise. Flatten that. Now, you could stop here. I would take this a little further. We haven't done noise reduction yet. We haven't done sharpening yet. And we haven't done HDR toning yet. So that's what we're going to hit on to next. So let's bring up the camera raw filter again, because that's where I like to do my sharpening and noise reduction. It does a beautiful job of cleaning up images. And you do that when you pull up camera raw filter. You're going to go to this tab here, detail tab. Okay, let's zoom in. Now this image really, I mean, look how clean this is. It's really not a whole lot of noise in this image in the first place, but there's some. Let's go to here. There's a little bit there. The color noise is not horrible. You can just drag this slider. You can see it though. There's some green and blue coming in through there that shouldn't be there. And look at that. It's gone. I just dragged it up to a 5. Do you see that? From there to 5, gone. Luminance noise. This, if you go too heavy, it will soften your image, but it'll help get rid of that luminance noise, which, see how that softens up? But you want to be careful. You don't want to soften your image too much. But I'd say right about there. And that cleans up the noise very nicely. Same thing with sharpening. You want to get more detail out of this nebulosity. You just, play around with these sliders, see what you get. Don't go too heavy. Let's go to 45 on the sharpening. Let's see what happens when we bump that radius up. 2 pixels. Detail. Go to extreme. See what it looks like. Just see what it does. Masking. Let's go down here. Not too heavy. These adjustments are slight, but it just enhances the sharpness there ever so slightly. That's what I like about camera raw filter, but that takes care of that. Now if you go to this tab, we can do some minor adjustments to vibrance and saturation as well. Just drag that up a little bit and get a little more color vibrance. Clarity adds a little more detail as well. It's almost like a sharpening agent. See that? Look how much that's all the way down, that's all the way up, which it's a little garish there, a little over the top, but something like this right here is nice, and you can really start to see all this dust around the nebula. I like that. Let's go with that. Boom. Okay. Let's flatten that, and let's go do some HDR toning on this thing and see what happens there. So I've duplicated the layer, and you want to do this under Image, Adjustments, HDR Toning. And yeah, let's just go ahead and flatten it because it does that anyway. Okay, so obviously that's just crazy blown out right there. So we got to play with these. You want to make sure all these are active, so you have full control over this. Okay, let's start with the highlights. Obviously that's blowing out our core. We don't want to lose core detail, so there we go. Let's bring that back right there. Vibrance is a little actually vibrance wasn't bad. Let's leave the color there. Saturation's okay. You could bring it up even more, but that's just getting kind of crazy. That's just unnatural. So little red's good there. Shadow. Then we lose all of our dust lanes. Then it's just over the top. So let's put this somewhere right about here to bring out those dust lanes a little better. Alright, tone and detail. that's nuts. But you see what you can do with this thing. It's crazy. Posterize it to blur it out. Let's make some small adjustments here just to see what happens. We want to add a little sharpness, but I would not mess with exposure slider. Gamma, this can add some detail as well. Bring out some detail and contrast. Alright, and again, this is all to your liking, but you want to keep the core in control. You want to try and bring out some of this detail surrounding the nebula, which it's done a pretty good job. And there you go. I mean, you can keep tweaking this. You can go back and make more curves adjustments to try and bring out more detail, because there's a little more there, but you got to be careful. You can only stretch this so far. Once you get beyond a certain point of what data is actually there and how clean your images are, you know, you start pushing the boundaries of what's going to leave you with a good image. So for me, I would just leave this here. I'm pretty satisfied with that. I think that's come out pretty darn good. So that's it, guys. That is, we would flatten this out. Hold on. We'd flatten this image out, save it as a TIFF, JPEG, whatever, post it online, blast it, brag. And that, in a nutshell, is how I do my image editing in Photoshop. I'm sure there's other things that can be done as well. You can go in here, and something that I'm going to continue to work on is working on layer masks, not just with HDR images like the M42, but really all my images, because when you work in masks, it just gives you so much more control over each item, be it the stars, the background. You can selectively choose and mask which areas you want to bring the detail out in. So more to come on that later. Guys, if you enjoyed the video, you felt like you got something good out of it, please like and subscribe. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any future videos that will be covering tutorials, gear, and imaging sessions. And until next time, clear skies.